There's a strange irony in the human spirit. The harder we try to appear strong, unbothered, composed, in control, the more fragile we quietly become. We hide our trembling behind calm smiles, our fear behind sarcasm, our loneliness behind busyness. We wear the mask of strength so convincingly that even we begin to believe it. And yet, deep down, we know it's a performance. But why do we do this? Why do we pretend to be strong when the pretense itself slowly hollows us out? Nietzsche once wrote, "What is noble? To be capable of facing life as it is." True strength, he believed, has nothing to do with denial or dominance. It's not about pretending we're invincible. It's about the courage to confront reality without illusions. And that includes the truth of our own weakness, our confusion, our vulnerability. Yet modern life rewards performance. We are taught to suppress pain, to act unshaken, to prove ourselves constantly, as if emotion were a threat to dignity. We curate confidence online, soldier through exhaustion, and label emotional honesty as weakness. In doing so, we become disconnected not only from others, but from ourselves. And here lies the paradox Nietzsche foresaw. When we act strong, we become slaves to the image of strength. But when we accept our weakness, when we let life wound us honestly, we begin to grow into something far greater: authenticity, resilience, freedom. In this exploration, we'll dive into 6 profound insights drawn from philosophy and psychology that reveal why acting strong is not only misguided, it's the very thing that keeps us weak. We'll explore how Nietzsche, Jung, and other thinkers understood vulnerability not as collapse, but as transformation. We'll see how denying pain fuels resentment, how false strength isolates us, and how the courage to feel might be the real measure of power. By the end, you may begin to see that the people who seem unshakable are often the most imprisoned, and that those who dare to tremble, to feel, to break open, are the ones who truly become unbreakable. It often begins innocently: a breakup, a failure. Someone tells us, "Be strong," and so we do. We square our shoulders, swallow our pain, and move on, or at least pretend. But slowly, this act of strength hardens into habit. We start curating ourselves, showing only what looks unshaken, what sounds wise, what appears in control. At first, it feels empowering. People admire us. They call us composed, resilient, mature, but something begins to rot beneath the applause. The more we act strong, the less we can afford not to be. The performance becomes a cage. Nietzsche saw this with frightening clarity. He observed that much of what we call virtue is often cowardice in disguise, the fear of showing our wounds. He wrote, "Every profound spirit needs a mask. Even more, around every profound spirit, a mask is continually growing." To Nietzsche, the mask was not evil by itself. It was sometimes necessary for survival. But the danger lies when we begin to believe that the mask is who we are. We start to confuse appearance with essence. Jean-Paul Sartre later called this bad faith, the act of lying to oneself in order to avoid responsibility for one's own freedom. When we pretend to be strong, we convince ourselves that we are what others expect us to be: unbreakable, certain, composed. We trade authenticity for safety, self-awareness for applause. And slowly, without realizing it, the mask stops being protection. It becomes a prison. Think about how often we hide behind the word fine. How are you? I set them fine. It's not a lie, exactly, but it's not the truth either. Fine is a wall, a word that keeps others from seeing what's real. And behind that wall, we grow lonely, because if no one sees our truth, then no one really sees us. Philosophically, this is the tragedy of the modern self. We are constantly performing strength in a culture terrified of weakness. Social media has only deepened this. Our lives are galleries of composure, each image another brick in the wall. We hide behind self improvement, behind quotes about grind and discipline, as if emotional honesty were laziness. But Nietzsche would call this a moral sickness, a herd instinct dressed as pride. He believed that most people are not strong because they are authentic, but because they are terrified of appearing weak. That is not strength, that is servitude. To live without the mask requires a different kind of courage, the courage to be seen, to let someone witness our trembling and not disguise it as control, to admit, I don't know what to do, and to let that admission be enough. Because here spits the paradox. When you no longer need to act strong, you begin to feel strong. The moment you drop the mask, life begins to breathe again through the cracks. The philosopher Alan Watts once compared this to water. Water does not resist. It yields, but in its yielding, it wears down mountains. True strength, he said, is not rigidity, it is flow. When we act strong, we become stone, solid, impressive, and lifeless. When we are real, we become water, flexible, enduring, alive. So ask yourself, what mask are you wearing today? What emotion have you labeled as weak? Only because the world told you it was unacceptable. Maybe your mask is I stem independent, or I stem in control, or I stem in over it. But masks, no matter how noble they seem, always hide something human, something waiting to be felt, to be spoken, to be healed. Nietzsche's challenge to us is simple, though not easy. Don't insist perform strength. Live truthfully. Let life see you. Let others see you. Let yourself see you. Because the self that needs to act strong is a self that doesn't yet know it already is. There is a particular kind of bitterness that hides behind the smile of the strong. It steads the quiet edge in the voice of someone who insists they're fine. The subtle satisfaction in saying, I don't need anyone. It's the resentment that grows when the soul feels unseen, but doesn't know how to ask to be seen. Nietzsche called this resentment, the hidden moral poison that seeps into us when we deny our weakness, our fear, or our envy. He saw it as the root of slave morality. When we cannot admit our vulnerability, we disguise it by inverting it. We call our fear virtue, our submission humility, our bitterness moral superiority. The result? A life that appears noble, but is secretly ruled by wounded pride. To Nietzsche, resentment was the psychology of those who cannot act, those who repress their instincts and frustrations until they turn them outward, condemning others for what they secretly desire. It's the person who preaches detachment but craves love, the one who mocks others' ambitions but feels invisible inside, the man who calls tenderness weakness because he is terrified of needing it. Carl Jung later expanded this idea in psychological terms. He called it the shadow, the hidden part of ourselves that contains everything we refuse to acknowledge: our fear, our rage, our desire, our longing for connection, all buried under the persona, the social mask of who we think we should be. And what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits, it builds pressure, it leaks out through our tone, our judgments, our moods, our passive cruelty. That's the great irony of repression. The more we suppress a feeling, the more power it gains over us. Imagine a man who refuses to cry at his father's funeral. He keeps it together. Everyone praises his composure, but weeks later, he lashes out at someone he loves over something trivial. The grief never left. It just found another language. Acting strong creates the same dissonance. It trains us to divide the self, to put light on one side, shadow on the other, until the human being becomes a battlefield. And on that battlefield, resentment thrives. Nietzsche believed this repression was what made societies hypocritical. People talk about virtue and morality not because they have conquered their darkness, but because they're terrified of confronting it. It's steps easier to moralize than to feel. But Jung offered a way through. He said one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. True strength begins the moment we stop pretending, when we turn inward and face what we most fear to feel. Because resentment is just unexpressed pain, pain that has forgotten its name. It hides behind cynicism, behind superiority, behind the quiet belief that no one understands. But if you can sit with that pain, not rationalize it, not suppress it, just feel it, something extraordinary begins to happen. The bitterness dissolves, the armor cracks, and what emerges is not weakness, but tenderness, the most misunderstood form of power. To let yourself feel is to let yourself heal. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim the energy we once used to hide it. When Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the higher person, he didn't mean a cold, emotionless titan. He meant a human being who has digested their own chaos, someone who no longer projects their suffering outward, but transforms it inward into wisdom and creativity. If we want to live without resentment, we must let life move through us, not bury it, not disguise it, not call our pain a virtue. So next time you feel yourself clenching, pretending, repressing, holding back tears, pause. Ask yourself, what am I trying to protect? And is that protection keeping me safe or keeping me small? Because strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the capacity to feel without being consumed. And weakness isn't what breaks us. It's what we become when we spend our lives denying that we ever had any. If this reflection resonates with you, consider subscribing. Each week we explore the deep questions that define a thoughtful life, not to escape the chaos of the world, but to face it together. We spend so much of our lives running from vulnerability, as if it were a kind of death. We armor our words, our expressions, our hearts. We hide our need to be loved behind irony, our longing for meaning behind busyness. And yet, if you trace every authentic human connection, every great act of courage, creativity, or love, you'll find vulnerability at its core. We've been taught to associate vulnerability with fragility, but in truth, it's the birthplace of transformation. Søren Kierkegaard understood this better than most. He believed that faith, real faith, begins not in certainty, but in trembling. It begins in that moment when we stand at the edge of the unknown and choose to leap anyway. He called it the leap of faith, not because we know where we'll land, but precisely because we don't. To Kierkegaard, the leap is life itself, to love despite knowing we could lose, to hope despite despair, to act despite fear. This, he said, is what makes us truly alive. The person who hides behind the illusion of control may appear strong, but they are spiritually paralyzed, trapped in safety, never touched by the sacred risk of being real. Jung, too, saw vulnerability as the key to individuation, the process of becoming whole. He wrote that the ego must eventually bow to what it cannot control, the unconscious, the mystery, the larger forces that shape our inner life. When we resist this, we become rigid, divided, neurotic. But when we surrender, when we allow life to touch us, something profound begins to happen. Our suffering becomes our teacher. Our cracks become the places where consciousness grows. Think about it. Every breakthrough you've ever had began with something breaking down. The moment when you couldn't hold it together anymore, when the mask fell, when the facade cracked, that's when truth entered. The soul doesn't evolve through perfection. It evolves through surrender. We live in a culture that confuses hardness with maturity. We're told that to be strong is to get over it, to keep going, to never show what hurts. But that's not maturity. That's denial. The mature person is not the one who never falls apart. It's the one who knows how to fall apart consciously. Kierkegaard once said that despair is the sickness unto death, not because despair kills the body, but because it numbs the soul. To feel deeply, to ache, to long, that's not weakness. That's proof that you're still alive. And yet, here sits the paradox. The moment we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we fear we'll lose respect. But it's exactly the opposite. Vulnerability doesn't make people turn away. It draws them in. It's how we recognize one another's humanity. The trembling in your voice, the tears you try to hide, these are the bridges by which we truly meet. Jung would call this integration, when we allow what was once unconscious to enter awareness, not to destroy us, but to deepen us. He said only the wounded physician heals, meaning it is through our own wounds that we learn how to hold the wounds of others. Our pain, when accepted, becomes our wisdom, and that sets the heart of this insight. To be vulnerable is not to be powerless. It's to step into the only kind of power that cannot be taken from you. The power of being unarmored. The power of truth. So what if the next time someone asks, "How are you?" you answered honestly, not with performance, not with politeness, but with presence? What if you let yourself be seen in all your uncertainty, your longing, your imperfection? Because every time you do, you invite others to do the same. And in that shared nakedness, something ancient comes alive again. Compassion. Perhaps the strongest person is not the one who never breaks, but the one who has learned that breaking is how the light gets in. If you want to understand the sickness of the modern world, look at what it worships. Everywhere we stir told to be tough, to grind, to never let them see you sweat. We measure strength by endurance, worth by output, confidence by how convincingly we can hide our exhaustion. But if toughness were true strength, why does it leave us feeling so hollow? Why do the people who seem most in control often confess in their quiet moments that they feel nothing at all? Nietzsche foresaw this emptiness long before it became a global epidemic. He saw how societies replace the sacred with the mechanical, how we trade the vitality of life for the predictability of systems. He warned that when people lose touch with their inner depths, they cling to surfaces: status, productivity, the illusion of mastery. The will to power becomes distorted, not the creative force he envisioned, but a desperate attempt to control what can't be controlled. Modern culture took Nietzsche's cry for becoming and turned it into a self-help slogan: be stronger, be unstoppable, crush your goals. But Nietzsche didn't mean that. His Übermensch was not a corporate warrior. It was a liberated soul, a human being who could affirm life even in its uncertainty, who could create new values from within rather than inherit the shallow metrics of power from without. Erich Fromm, a psychoanalyst and philosopher deeply influenced by both Marx and Freud, wrote about this same sickness in the 20th century. He called it the escape from freedom. He observed that modern individuals, terrified of isolation and uncertainty, willingly surrender their humanity to systems that promise order, corporations, ideologies, social hierarchies. We call this discipline. Fromm called it necrophilia, a love of death, of control, of rigidity, the opposite of biophilia, the love of life. When the soul is starved, toughness looks like virtue, but it's really just a shield against feeling. Think about the slogans we live by: push through the pain, don't let emotions get in the way, keep moving forward. These sound empowering until you realize they were written for soldiers, not for souls. We've turned emotional suppression into a moral code. Children are told to man up. Workers are told to leave their feelings at the door. Leaders are told to stay professional. And the result is a world of people who are efficient, ambitious, and profoundly disconnected from the pulse of life. Fromm believed that the greatest danger of this toughness culture is that it replaces being with having. We no longer ask, who am I becoming, but what am I achieving? And when our worth depends on what we produce, any sign of softness feels like failure. But look closely, and you'll see that this obsession with toughness hides a deep spiritual fear, the fear of being human. To be human is to be uncertain, to need, to care, to grieve. And to feel all of that in a world that values efficiency is an act of rebellion. Nietzsche would call this rebellion the beginning of a new morality, one born from courage, not conformity. The courage to reject society's script of strength and write your own definition. The courage to say, I would rather be real than be admired, because what we call toughness often isn't strength at all. It's numbness. And numbness is not peace. It sets paralysis. The person who feels deeply, who cries, who questions, who pauses, that person is alive. And to be alive, Nietzsche reminds us, is the highest form of power. So perhaps it's time we stop worshiping the stoic mask and start honoring the tender pulse beneath it. Because the culture that glorifies toughness is slowly dying of spiritual starvation. And the individuals who dare to stay soft, who refuse to harden, may just be the ones carrying the last breath of something sacred. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy lies a terrifying possibility, what he called nihilism, the collapse of meaning itself. When the old gods die and the inherited values crumble, what's left? A world where nothing seems sacred, where all we can do is perform strength, louder, harder, faster, to drown out the silence that follows. Nihilism isn't just a philosophical theory, it's an emotional reality. It's the quiet numbness after years of pretending. It's waking up and feeling nothing, not sadness, not joy, just a dull ache that life no longer feels real. Nietzsche warned that this would be the greatest danger of the modern age, not chaos, but emptiness. And what's striking is how perfectly his warning describes our current world. We live surrounded by noise, yet starving for meaning. We celebrate grind culture, yet secretly feel disconnected. We're constantly performing, online, at work, in relationships, because if we stopped, even for a moment, we might have to feel the truth that we're not okay. But here's the paradox Nietzsche offers. The way out of nihilism is not through denial, but through radical honesty, through saying yes to life as it truly is. He called this amor fati, the love of one's fate, not the resigned acceptance of stoicism, but the passionate embrace of everything that exists, even pain, even confusion, even loss. To love fate is to say, I will not escape my humanity. I will meet life exactly as it comes. Albert Camus, writing decades later, took Nietzsche's insight and transformed it into a rebellion of the heart. In the myth of Sisyphus, he imagines the condemned man pushing his boulder up the mountain over and over for eternity, a meaningless task. And yet, Camus writes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, because the act of confronting absurdity and still choosing to live is the purest expression of freedom. Emotional honesty is this same act of rebellion. To admit, I feel lost. To confess, I am afraid. To say, I don't know why I'm here and still get up and live, that is a spiritual revolution. Camus called it the lucid life, to see clearly without illusions and still choose to participate in existence. And Nietzsche, though often misread as a prophet of cold strength, was in truth a prophet of depth. His call was not to suppress emotion, but to transfigure it, to turn suffering into creation, despair into vision, pain into wisdom. That's why emotional honesty is not weakness. It's the very thing that keeps nihilism from swallowing us. Because when you can name what you feel, you reconnect with reality. When you allow pain to speak, you remember you are still capable of love. When you let yourself weep, you affirm that something still matters enough to move you. Nihilism begins where we stop caring. Honesty begins where we stop pretending. And life begins the moment we stop acting strong and start telling the truth. In this way, every tear becomes an act of defiance. Every confession, I'm scared, I'm hurting, I miss them, becomes a kind of prayer, not to a god, but to life itself. Because you cannot love life if you are too afraid to feel it. Nietzsche once said, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos is your raw, unfiltered emotion, the storm of being alive. And emotional honesty is not the destruction of that storm, but the dance within it. So perhaps salvation doesn't come from becoming stronger, but from becoming truer. To stand in the ruins of certainty, look the void in the eye, and whisper, I will not lie to myself anymore. I will feel. I will live. That steps not despair. That steps resurrection. That steps what it means to be free. They were usually imagined strength as a wall, solid, unshakable, unmoved by the world. But perhaps that steps the wrong image altogether. Because what is a wall, really, if not a symbol of fear? The rebel itself keeps life from getting in. Nietzsche believed that most people live behind such walls. He called it the spirit of gravity, the heaviness that comes from trying to protect the self from experience. We try to master life instead of meeting it. We try to control emotions instead of feeling them. We call this control strength, but Nietzsche saw it as exhaustion, the fatigue of a spirit that no longer trusts the world enough to remain open to it. In contrast, true strength, for Nietzsche, was the ability to affirm life completely, not selectively, not conditionally, but wholly, to say yes to joy and to suffering, to gain and to loss, to love and to heartbreak, all of it. He wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." This is not passivity, it's radical openness, a spiritual fearlessness that refuses to shut down even when the heart breaks. To understand this, it helps to look beyond the West, to Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu taught that the strongest thing in the universe is also the softest water. Water yields to everything, yet overcomes everything. It is humble, shapeless, flexible, and for that very reason, unstoppable. He wrote, "The soft overcomes the hard, the gentle overcomes the rigid." Strength in his view was not domination but alignment, living in harmony with the flow of life instead of resisting it. Nietzsche's amor fati and Lao Tzu's wu wei, effortless alignment with the Tao, speak the same truth in different tongues. Real power is not control, it's a surrender, not weakness, but willingness, the courage to let reality move through you without hardening into bitterness or fear. We see this in nature constantly. A tree that is too rigid in a storm breaks. The one that bends survives. And so it is with the soul. Most people, after being hurt, close off. They promise themselves they will never love like that again, never trust like that again, never feel like that again. And in doing so, they stop growing. They become walls instead of rivers. They mistake numbness for peace. But the person who stays open, who allows heartbreak to deepen their capacity for love, who lets disappointment teach them tenderness, that person becomes invincible in the truest sense. Not because nothing can wound them, but because nothing can make them stop feeling. Lao Tzu would call this the way, living so attuned to life that you no longer fight against its currents. Nietzsche would call it the yes-sayer, the one who affirms life with all its contradictions. Both speak of the same state, an unarmored spirit. To stay open is the highest courage, because openness requires trust in yourself, in others, in existence itself. It means letting go of the illusion that safety is found in control. It means learning to live like water, to flow, to adapt, to soften, to heal. Imagine if we replace the question, "How can I be strong?" with "How can I stay open?" What would our relationships look like? Our world? Maybe strength is instead about enduring the storm. Maybe it's about dancing with it. Nietzsche once wrote that the secret of joy is the yes, and Lao Tzu might add, the secret of peace is the flow. Together they whisper, don't close, don't resist, stay open. Because the heart that stays open, even after being broken 1,000 times, is not weak. It is the rarest and most powerful thing in the world. Let's return to the question we began with. Why is acting strong, pretending to be invulnerable, untouchable, endlessly in control, the dumbest thing you can do? Because every time we act strong, we abandon what is most alive in us. We trade depth for performance. We stop growing, stop feeling, stop being real. The great paradox we have explored is this. The strength we perform to protect ourselves is precisely what isolates us. And the vulnerability we fear most, the one that feels like weakness, is the only doorway to real power, real connection, and real peace. Across these 6 insights, we've watched this truth unfold like a spiral, from Nietzsche's critique of the mask of strength, to Jung's descent into shadow, to Stoic self-mastery, to Kierkegaard's leap of faith, to the transformation of pain, and finally, to the courage to stay open. Each insight revealed a different face of the same realization. Acting strong is the ego's defense against reality. Nietzsche warned that our obsession with appearing powerful turns us into hollow imitations of strength. Real power begins in the shadow. Jung taught that wholeness requires us to integrate what we've hidden or denied, our vulnerability, fear, and longing. Mastery is not repression, but harmony. The Stoics showed us that discipline isn't about suppressing emotion, but transforming it into wisdom. Faith is the courage to act despite fear. Kierkegaard's leap reminded us that true strength lives beyond certainty in the willingness to risk love, meaning, and truth. Suffering, embraced consciously, becomes strength. Nietzsche again guided us here. We grow not by escaping pain, but by letting it carve us into something greater. And finally, openness is the highest power. Lao Tzu and Nietzsche converge. The strongest soul is not hard but fluid, able to flow, feel, and stay alive through everything. If you look closely, you still see a pattern. Every true philosopher of life, no matter how distant in culture or time, says the same thing in their own way. Strength is not resistance, it's resilience. Not the refusal to feel, but the ability to feel fully without collapsing. The world teaches us to harden, to posture, to appear unbreakable. But life, with its quiet intelligence, keeps softening us through heartbreak, loss, humility, love. Each moment of pain is an invitation to drop the armor and step closer to what's real. You do not need to perform strength anymore. You are not meant to be a statue. You are meant to be alive, breathing, aching, evolving. Every scar on your soul is not a mark of failure, but a seal of participation in the great experiment of being human. Nietzsche would say that the truly strong are those who can affirm their life entirely, the joy and the suffering, the gain and the loss, and still say yes. And maybe that steps what this journey has really been about. The art of saying yes. Yes to uncertainty. Yes to vulnerability. Yes to being human. Because the truth is, there is no act stronger than authenticity, no armor thicker than honesty, no hero greater than the one who dares to stay open. So the next time you feel the urge to act strong, pause, feel instead, let yourself tremble, let yourself break open. And in that openness, you'll discover something ancient, a quiet, steady power that asks for nothing and fears nothing. It's the strength that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. That is the strength Nietzsche pointed toward. The strength that is not an act, but a way of being. So here is your invitation. Stop performing. Start participating. Stop guarding your heart. Start giving it, because the world doesn't need another strong person. It needs an alive one. And if this journey spoke to something inside you, subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the deeper work of self-honesty and growth. We explore these questions every week. Together, we're not seeking to be perfect. We're learning how to be real, and that, in the end, is the only strength that lasts.